All right, you need to make sure you answer the before reading question before you begin listening to the chapter. All right, you need to track the text while I read. Chapter 3. Claudette left her house on the first day of high school, determined to put her mind on her studies. Delphine's funeral, just 2 weeks before, had been as sad and bewildering a day as she could remember, but now she hoped she could put it behind her. Now it was time to focus. Booker T. Washington High, whose sports teams were known as the Yellow Jackets, was one of Montgomery's two public high schools for black students, the other being George Washington Carver High School. Almost all of the sons and daughters of Montgomery's working-class black families went to either Washington or Carver, with a few Catholic students attending St. Jude's and many of the children of Montgomery's black professionals enrolled at other private schools. Booker T. Washington was a buff-colored, three-story brick citadel. The glass in the lower windows was painted white so students couldn't look out at the street. Desktops were gouged and book covers cracked. Pages were torn from years of use. There was so little money from the city funds that each year the principal put a fundraising event to buy desk, books, and equipment for the cafeteria. In the fall of 1952, the air around the building was thick with the dust of construction, as workers raced to complete a new wing of the school before winter in an effort to keep up with Montgomery's expanding black population. Though being smart was an asset, Claudette soon found that having light skin and straight hair was the surest key to popularity at Booker T. Washington. Many girls woke up early and spent hours applying hot combs to their hair, trying to straighten it to look, as some said, almost white. But Claudette's hair wouldn't stay straight or flat no matter how long she pressed it, and her skin was very dark. On top of that, she was from King Hill, a neighborhood she loved but others scorned, and no matter how hard she fought it, Delphine's death had left her feeling raw and lonely, especially when she passed the spot each day where her sister had always waited for her after school. Suddenly alone, Claudette started life as a yellow jacket, feeling she was very bottom of the social heap. All right, I would like you to pause 1 right here, and I want you to answer one of those 4 things on your pause 1 sheet. Claudette. Right after Delphine died, I became very sensitive. Just about any cruel word or insult could start me crying, even if it was aimed at someone besides me. One thing especially bothered me. We black students constantly put ourselves down. If you were dark-complexioned, they'd call you nappy-headed, or they'd call you nappy-headed, not nappy-haired. Nappy-headed. And the N-word. We were saying it to each other, to ourselves. I'd heard that word used, and I would start crying. I wouldn't let people use it around me. How could you hear such things and not feel emotional? When girls said things like that, it was bad enough, but when boys said them to you, it really hurt. For some reason, we seem to hate ourselves. We students put down our hair texture and skin color all the time. Can you imagine getting up in the morning every day and looking in the mirror and saying to yourself, I have bad hair? Or, I'm black and nobody likes me. The football players went for girls with flowing hair and lighter skin. And who could grow wavy, shoulder-length hair? It'd be a biracial kid. The girls with the darkest complexions never got picked to be the queen of anything. Middle-class black girls would always try to separate themselves from dark-skinned girls like me and emulate white girls. That's a vocab word, emulate, if you want to go ahead and try and figure that out. Tragedy struck once again. In November, when Claudette's schoolmate and neighbor, 16-year-old Jeremiah Reeves, was arrested and charged with raping a white housewife. Reeves confessed to the crime. Police quickly expanded the charges, claiming that he was responsible for raping 6 white women after breaking into their homes. Blacks in Montgomery were furious. Most were convinced that the police had forced him to confess. One of the authorities had led him to the death chamber, threatening that if he did not confess once, he would burn there later. Martin Luther King Jr., then the new pastor at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, wrote, After a brief trial, an all-white jury sentenced Reeves to death in the electric chair. This brought blacks throughout Alabama to a boiling point. Even if Reeves was guilty of the charges, something few blacks believed, he hadn't killed anyone. Why should he pay with his life? Blacks knew that no white man accused of a similar crime against a black woman would have been convicted at all, let alone sentenced to die. The verdict radicalized many students at Booker T. Washington High. Reeves was a popular senior, widely admired as a talented drummer. He hadn't fled from police. In fact, he had turned himself in. Everyone had always predicted Jeremiah Reeves would go somewhere special. Now he wasn't going anywhere at all, unless something could be done. He would languish on death row until he turned 21 and became legally old enough to take the short walk from his cell to the electric chair. Languish is another one of your words if you want to write that down. Jeremiah's plight pulled Claudette's attention away from her personal difficulties to the injustices blacks faced everywhere. She went to the rallies, wrote letters to him in prison, and collected money for his legal defense. The effort to support Reeves became the first time many black teenagers in Montgomery ever acted to address injustices outside their own personal problems. Claudette Colvin was one of those teens. Jeremiah Reeves' arrest was the turning point of my life. That was when I and a lot of other students really started thinking about prejudice and racism. I was furious when I found out what had happened. Jeremiah lived right below us on the hill. I knew him well and admired him like everybody else did. We girls thought he was like a rock star because he was so stylish. He always wore a starched clean shirt and there was never a spot of mud on his shoes. He was a wonderful drummer in the school band and in bands around town. The NAACP was called in to take his case. That was the first time I had ever heard of them. I think that's why the jury sentenced him to death, to show that the NAACP couldn't take over the South. Everyone talked about Jeremiah Reeves at school. There were rumors that the jailers pulled out his fingernails and tortured him. One girl hid in a delivery truck and got into the jail but didn't make it to his cell. We showed movies to try to raise money for his lawyers. I would take whatever we raised to his mother. The hypocrisy of it made me so angry. That's another one of your words. Black girls were extremely vulnerable. My mother and my grandmother told me never to go anywhere with a white man no matter what. I grew up hearing horror story after horror story about black girls who were raped by white men and how they never got justice either. When a white man raped a black girl, something that happened all the time, it was just his word against hers, and no one would ever believe her. The white man always got off, but now they were going to hold Jeremiah for years as a minor just so they could legally execute him when he came of age. That changed me. That put a lot of anger in me. I stayed angry about Jeremiah Reeves for a long time. All right, I want you to pause 2. Go ahead and fill out pause 2. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court threw out Reeves's conviction and ordered a new trial. By then, Reeves had retracted his confession, insisting he had been forced by police to make it. For the rest of his life, he maintained he was innocent. But after 2 days of testimony, the new jury, again entirely white, took only 34 minutes to restore Reeves' death sentence. Now all hope was gone. Many at school wept for their classmate, but Claudette fumed. Why did everyone accept injustice? How could adults complain at home about the insulting way they were treated at work and then put a happy face on for the white employers? Why did classmates worry about good hair when they had no rights? When was anybody ever going to stand up? Claudette was still furious about Jeremiah Reeves' plight when, on the first day of her sophomore year, she met someone who gave her the confidence to transform her anger into action. Miss Geraldine Nesbitt dressed sharp, more like a saleslady than a schoolteacher. She was slender and petite. She grew up in Montgomery and went to Alabama State College, but she had a master's degree in education from Columbia University in New York City. She came to school early and stayed late. She was tough, but she was out to make you learn. We were supposed to be an English literature class, but Miss Nesbitt used literature to teach life. She said she didn't have time to teach us like a regular English teacher. We were too far behind. Instead, she taught us the world through literature. She taught the Constitution. She taught the Magna Carta and the Articles of Confederation. We studied Hawthorne and Poe. We discussed Patrick Henry's speech, "Give me liberty or give me death," and applied it to our own situation. We'd pick out a passage from the Bible and examine it from a literary standpoint. We wrote poems and essays and themes. We even wrote obituaries. She brought in her own books from home because we had so few books in our library at school. One day, we all came into class and Miss Nesbit had her face buried in an open book. We all said, "Why are you doing that?" Finally, she came up with a big smile and said, "Ah, there's no smell as good as the smell of a new book." Right at the end of sophomore year, the Supreme Court ruled that public schools like ours would have to be integrated, though they didn't say when. That means that blacks and whites will go to school together. Whenever it happened, it was bound to be a big change. Segregation was so total. It wasn't just that we went to separate schools. We even walked to school on opposite sides of the highway from whites, shouting insults at each other across the street. In class, we asked each other, "Would you want to sit next to a white student?" A lot of kids said things like, "If they don't want to sit next to me on a bus, why would I want to sit next to one in class?" I felt differently. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to grow up and greet the world, and so did my best friends. I thought if whites came into our schools, maybe our textbooks would improve. Sometimes, when I babysat, I'd sneak looks at the textbooks of white students who lived in those families. There were essays on the Lincoln-Douglas debate, which I had never heard of. They made me think for the first time about the economic basis for slavery. While we were taking routine math, whites my age were studying algebra. Our school's entire set of encyclopedias only had 2 articles about blacks, Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver. In fact, we had very few books of any kind in our school library, and the library downtown, the colored library, didn't have many more. I didn't care who I sat next to. I wanted a good education. Miss Nesbit made us see that we had a history too, that our story didn't begin by being captured and chained and thrown onto a boat. There had been life and culture before that. She related literature back to our lives. She would ask, "Why do we celebrate the 4th of July, of Independence Day, when we are still in slavery? Why are there no black people except Sammy Davis Jr. and Pearl Bailey on TV?" I had Miss Nesbit in both 10th and 11th grades, and during those years I grew up in confidence. In those years she challenged my assumptions I had taken for granted. She said, "There's no such thing as good hair. Hair is just hair. Everyone is born with the hair they have, and you just do the best you can with it." Same with skin color. She wanted us to love whatever color we were. Our history teacher, Miss Josie Lawrence, was the blackest teacher in the whole school, but she had the same attitude. She'd say, "I'm a real African. I'm a pure-blooded African." She was proud of it. She taught us all the different nations of Africa and the periods of African history. It all made sense to me. I wasn't ashamed of my thick lips and broad nose and coarse hair. I'd always thought God made our features so we could be comfortable in the hot African sun. Little by little, I began to form a mission for myself. I was going to be like Harriet Tubman and go north to liberate my people. I admired Harriet Tubman more than anyone else I read about. Her courage, the pistols she wore, the fact that she never lost a passenger on the Underground Railroad. I wasn't going to go to Alabama State College where they taught you how to teach school but didn't teach you how to get your freedom. We had nothing but preachers and teachers in the South. I was going to do something different. I was going to be a lawyer. My mom always said I could outtalk any 40 lawyers. I agreed it would be a good fit. In 1955, my junior year, Miss Nesbit and Miss Lawrence team taught Negro History Week. We really got into it. We spent the whole February talking about the injustices we black people suffer every day in Montgomery. It was total immersion. That means they got really into it. My parents had only gone to 6th grade. They'd never had a chance for a class discussion like that, so I was grateful for it and totally receptive. I was done talking about good hair and good skin, but not addressing our grievances. I was tired of adults complaining about how badly they were treated and not doing anything about it. I'd had enough of just feeling angry about Jeremiah Reeves. I was tired of hoping for justice. When my moment came, I was ready. All right, if you read this insert down here at the bottom, it will tell you more about Brown versus Board of Education, which integrated schools in Topeka, Kansas. And if you go back, you can read more about Jeremiah Reeves and the NAACP. All right, I need you to finish up your reading guides. And when you're finished with your reading guides, turn them in. And I want you to do the 20 facts that you've already started working on. All right, good job.